A deputy sheriff collides with a bright hovering object.
Could this be evidence that this is an otherworldly craft?
Officers listen to the sound, never before heard on national television, of a glowing orb.
We have 3 corroborating sources saying that it was most likely a real UFO.
Police cruisers give chase to an unidentified triangular aircraft.
It was witnessed and reported across 4 different precincts.
And incredible visual evidence uncovered in the most famous UFO case in Europe.
This object was above me about 500 feet. It was huge.
Could the detailed accounts of UFO activity by law enforcement provide proof that we are not alone? August 27, 1979, not far from the North Dakota border, in the northeast corner of Minnesota, near the town of Stephen. It's about 2 a.m. as Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson drives his police cruiser on a dark and deserted rural highway. What happens next will be seen by UFO investigators as a landmark case involving law enforcement that almost cost Val Johnson his life.
He was doing, I assume, a routine patrol in a fairly quiet stretch of the area. And he sees a bright light off to the side, out his window. Initially thinking it was an aircraft, he thought it was unusual and followed around to get a better look at it. And next thing he knows, this thing is low over the ground. A little smaller than a basketball, a glowing ball of light, which then seemingly almost instantly accelerated at his vehicle.
All of a sudden, it crashed into his car. It broke the headlight. It broke off the antenna, and it broke the windshield. It was a brilliant ball of light. It obviously had substance to it to do all of that damage to his cruiser.
40 minutes later, Deputy Val Johnson calls for help over his radio. Another sheriff's deputy reaches the scene of the accident within minutes. He finds Johnson's car sideways in the road, and Johnson in a daze.
The officer was obviously extremely shaken by all of that. When backup arrived, they claimed he was in a true state of shock.
Deputy Val Johnson can only remember making visual contact with a strange object hovering just above the ground, being blinded by a bright light, and hearing the sound of breaking glass just before passing out. The next day, photos are taken of Johnson's squad car, which shows damage from a collision.
This ball of light left evidence in the form of a broken headlight and damage to the windshield. It would be as if something hit his vehicle from the air. That is what it would look like to me, but no visible damage to the body of the car. It is a bit odd.
Clearly, it wasn't another car or an aeroplane. I mean, there would have been wreckage, there would have been debris. And he would have seen it and reported it as such. But we don't really have any certainty about what we're dealing with.
Strangely, the doctor who examines Val Johnson finds indications around his eyes of welding burns. In the process of arc welding, the intense arc light emits ultraviolet radiation and can damage a person's skin as if sunburned. But Val Johnson had not been welding.
The police and the highway patrol investigators believed that this was some kind of anomalous experience. They were never able to find a reasonable explanation for what had occurred.
UFO researchers recently uncovered a transcript, never before seen on national television, of an interview with Deputy Val Johnson shortly after his close encounter. It reads in part, "I got to the intersection of 5 and Minnesota State 220 when I noticed a very bright, brilliant light, 8 to 12 inches in diameter, 3 to 4 feet off the ground. The edges were very defined. I thought perhaps at first that it appeared to be a landing light from an aircraft. I proceeded south on 220, about a mile and 3/10, when the light intercepted my vehicle. The brakes were engaged by forces unknown to myself, as I do not remember doing this." A photo taken at the encounter location reveals skid marks going in a straight line for 99 feet, then suddenly veering to the left. Not long after the incident, in 1979, Val Johnson was interviewed on local TV about his strange encounter.
The light was coming at me, it was extremely bright. The inside of the car lit up, I can remember that. And something did strike my vehicle. Something didn't want me there. I really don't know how to classify it.
The official findings of a confidential investigation report filed the day after the incident says that Val Johnson's patrol vehicle was involved in an accident with an unknown object. But what kind of unknown object was it? And could what was described as a brilliant light actually cause all the damage to Deputy Johnson's car? Bob Spearing, a field investigator and visual analysis expert for the Mutual UFO Network, attempts to answer this very question.
Val Johnson claims that he skidded 99 feet. His car was turned sideways when he was found. He claims he was unconscious for 39 minutes. Basically, all of the damage to the car was done on the left side, the driver's side. The headlight, the windshield, and the antenna, all right, was bent at a 60-degree angle. An engineer from Ford Motor Company, he was unable to determine what caused the cracks, but he said that a pressure by some unknown force caused the cracks in the windshield. I would classify this as probably an orb UFO sighting which attacked his car.
Since 1979, Val Johnson's close encounter has gained worldwide attention. In part, many believe because Johnson was a police officer. But what makes a UFO incident reported by law enforcement more convincing than claims by other witnesses?
The police officers tend to be some of our best witnesses because they're not only trained observers, they're not prone to fantasy, and it's not in their nature to lie.
For him to come out and say something like this, to put his job at risk, to me adds a lot of credibility to this case.
Here is someone who holds a responsible position in the community. He's a deputy sheriff, and yet here he is talking about not just a UFO sighting, but a UFO sighting that ended with his police vehicle on one side. People like that don't speak out lightly. When someone like that tells you this is what happens, you can take that to the bank.
Although the evidence in this case is compelling, many believe it's circumstantial at best. Proof of a UFO encounter would need physical evidence and eyewitness corroboration. One such case like that has gone unequaled for nearly 40 years. Coming up.
We actually have a recording of the UFO, and the recording suggests that the object was close by.
There's no aerial object that we had that was able to do the kinds of things that are described here.
When it comes to UFO sightings, the police are regarded as far more reliable witnesses than most. Even so, they need corroborating evidence to make their cases truly credible. March 17, 1981, 4:03 a.m., 20 miles north of Portland, Oregon, near St. Helens. It's an early Tuesday morning, as Sergeant Russell Yoakum of the Oregon Police Department is driving along Highway 30. Suddenly, out over the Columbia River, a bright orb lights up the entire area.
It was red, orange. It appeared to be large, maybe 30 feet in diameter. And it was hovering 80 to 100 feet above the water. Sergeant Yoakum believed it was moving toward the Portland airport. So he's watching this. He radioed into headquarters. And 2 state police officers heard him.
Sergeant Yoakum meets the 2 officers at a turnout with a view of the bizarre aerial object over the river.
A couple of civilians also are there. So you've got about 5 people watching this. A very bright, unusual light. You gotta wonder, what is this thing that's just making such a bright light at this time of day? No one can figure this one out.
On the opposite side of the Columbia River in Washington State, someone else is also watching the bright orb, and he's a lot closer to it.
There was a ham radio operator who was monitoring the police communications. And he was also watching the object. He got in touch with the officers and he noticed that the object was making noise.
The ham radio operator, known as Lucky 13, volunteers to hold a microphone out his window so the police can hear the sound he claims is coming from the glowing orb. Here, for the first time on national television, is the audio recording of the conversation between Oregon police and Lucky 13.
Hey, Lucky, we got a tape recorder sitting there by a radio whenever you're ready. All it is now is just an orange glow. That's all I can see. I don't want to watch it. You tell us what it does. Listen. Engines. Can you hear it? It sounds like to me a power plant diesel motor and a screeching noise in between it there with it.
We actually have a recording of the UFO, and the recording suggests that the object was close by. But the second thing is, this actually implies it's a physical object. This is clearly a craft of some kind. The question is, with the noise, is it an engine? Is it a type of propulsion?
There's no aerial object, particularly in 1981, that we had that was able to do the kinds of things that are described here. That looked like this thing looks, that sounded like this thing apparently sounded like.
The police officers and Lucky 13 observe the UFO for another 14 minutes until 4:43 a.m., just before sunrise, when the object goes dark and disappears. But was this mechanical-sounding glowing orb really from out of this world, as investigators believe? And if so, might it be similar to the spherical orb reported by Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson? And if we accept these light spheres are from a distant world, the big question is, why are they here? Searching for answers, UFO investigators note that the Columbia River Basin and the nearby Yakima Indian Reservation in Washington State have long been the site of unexplained aerial phenomena. could there be a connection between orb UFOs and nearby Native American tribes?
The indigenous tribes have always been well aware of UFOs and alien sightings for many thousands of years.
In 2010, orb UFOs have been spotted near the Yakima Reservation.
How are they moving so fast? They're fast. They could just zip down here fast.
The Yakima Indians call these alien observers their star brothers.
What we're looking at here are two apparent orbs circling each other in the Yakima Valley in Washington State. Washington State is known for earthquake lights because it sits on a fault line. So there's a theory that these lights, which are seen by many, many people over hundreds of years, may be a natural phenomenon. As you can see a car right here passing very close to the objects, we can gauge how big they might be. They might be as wide as 5 feet across. Is it a natural phenomenon? Is it some sort of UFO? We just don't know enough at this point to be able to tell what it is that we're looking at.
For UFO researchers, questions about the origin of glowing orbs and UFOs in general come down to whether or not they appear to be under intelligent control. And the answer can only be determined by the evidence.
With the Columbia River case, this UFO made a sound, and we were fortunate enough that the people involved in this, as the witnesses, taped it. The sound starts up again, and they say, it sounds like it's revving up its engines.
Can you hear it? Sounds like to me a power plant diesel motor.
Well, that sounds to me like they're describing clearly a machine, a craft of some sort.
But is it possible that even cases with multiple police witnesses and hard evidence can be dismissed by skeptics? Perhaps. Then again, sometimes the truth seems more obvious when numerous police are chasing the same unidentified aerial object from town to town. Coming up.
We have in real time what the police officers were actually experiencing.
UFO activity was witnessed and reported across 4 different precincts.
UFO researchers believe the glowing orbs encountered by law enforcement could be a natural phenomenon, or they could be from another world entirely. But what about UFOs that appeared to be unidentified spacecraft? In a more recent police UFO file, what began as an odd civilian sighting grew to involve multiple police departments in numerous neighboring townships, and perhaps reveal a military cover-up. January 5th, 2000, Wednesday morning. In Highland, Illinois, shortly before sunrise, around 4 a.m., Melvern Knoll, a truck driver and owner of a local miniature golf course, is about to head home when something overhead catches his eye.
He looks up and he sees this very large, low object. No sound. It looked like it was 2 stories high.
And then out of nowhere, this single-story ranch with a penthouse on top slowly floats over his miniature golf course. It appeared to be rectangular in shape. This object had a series of windows that ran down the side.
The object was so large, it was the size of a football field. And clearly, it was reported to police.
Immediately afterward, the sheriff's dispatcher shares the unlikely details with officers in the field.
Well, we just received a call from Highland PD, reference to it. The truck driver just stopped in and said there was a flying object in the area of Lebanon. It was like a 2-story house, It had white lights and red blinking lights, and it was last seen southwest over Lebanon.
Lebanon police officer Ed Barton responds to the call. Within minutes, the officer relays what he sees in the sky, documenting the events as it unfolds.
Be advised, there's a very bright white light east of town. Looks like it's just east of Summerfield, and it keeps changing colors. I'll go there and see if maybe it's an aircraft. It doesn't look like an aircraft, though.
We've got the whole conversation as it transpired that morning. We have in real time what the police officers were actually experiencing, and that is really valuable to us.
Officer Barton, who is looking into this, suddenly he sees lights himself. And it's one of those situations where a police officer goes from investigator to witness and actually becomes part of the story.
As the unidentified object approaches his location, Barton pulls over to listen. And as the UFO passes directly overhead, the officer notices there is no sound. After resuming his chase, strangely, Barton gives a completely different description than previously reported.
Officer Barton describes a huge triangular-shaped object. And we know it's big because he describes how it's blocking out the stars as it goes overhead.
Was this a different UFO being observed? Or did the officer's training allow him to provide a more accurate description?
He describes how the movement of this thing is very different to that of a conventional aircraft. It doesn't bank, he said, like an aircraft would. It pivots. It moves from side to side. And again, this is an experienced, trained observer.
Thinking quickly, Officer Barton decides to see what the military might know about the situation.
Would you contact Scott Air Force Base to see if they have anything flying in this area, please? 10-4.
Scott Air Force Base was called when the craft was only 2 miles away. They had no knowledge of this craft. It didn't show up on radar. Very perplexing.
Is it possible the military was really unaware? And could the UFO be using some form of stealth technology?
Whether it's a plane or not, it's heading westbound now. Matter of fact, if the shadow officer looks up, they can probably see it by now.
It went from town to town, and the greatest part about it were the witnesses calling each other, the dispatches, police officers were talking to the next town over and letting them know, well, you should be seeing it.
In nearby Shiloh, Officer David Martin is on patrol when he spots the object about a quarter-mile away. He pulls over and observes the huge triangle flying slowly in the distance without making a sound.
I see something, but I don't know what that is. Probably heading Lambert.
As the craft leaves Shiloh, the officer estimates the craft accelerates from about 15 miles an hour to 100 in an instant.
What really lends a lot of credibility to the case is it was witnessed and reported across 4 different precincts. There was a ton of radio chatter that happened as they were trying to figure out what they were witnessing. Even the military was contacted, which adds a ton more credibility when they call the military and they tell them, we think we have a UFO.
Is it possible, as researchers claim, that one or more objects observed in the skies of Illinois were in fact off-world alien spacecraft that blocked out the stars, moved without sound, and defied the laws of physics?
Nobody's telling us exactly what it is, and it's been sighted across many counties. So what could it have been? We're thinking that it probably was a UFO that could have been using alien technology.
The Illinois UFOs were witnessed by multiple police officers who documented what they saw. But amazingly, the police chase will continue through 3 more townships and under the noses of military air traffic control. Coming up.
There was no radar. It was complete denial.
Scott Air Force Base is 2 miles away. They say, nope, we got nothing. So what's that all about?
In the early morning hours of January 5th, 2000, a large and very bizarre object is reported to be flying over Highland, Illinois. But within the hour, police in nearby townships see something completely different. A large, triangular flying object. Could there have been 2 different UFOs in the air, causing confusion on the ground? Or might the difference be due to more reliable information provided by police?
These are the different configurations that were seen by multiple eyewitnesses on the night of January 5, 2000, including at least 3 police officers. Multiple triangle configurations. Eyewitnesses reported a mechanical understructure like stacked Legos or plumbing, probably 60 to 80 feet across.
As the triangular object continues over the state, at about 4:30 a.m., Craig Stevens with the Millstadt Police Department sees it flying overhead and immediately reports the sighting to the sheriff's dispatcher.
I've got that object inside also.
Are you serious?
It's huge.
Temple, what does it look like to you?
It's kind of V-shaped. Looks like it's possibly headed toward Lambert.
Temple, that's what Shiloh 7 was heading towards Sherby Heights.
Craig Stevens and other police officers stated that when it departed the area, it departed like a spark off a grinding wheel and made no sonic boom. Absolutely immediate acceleration made no sonic boom.
Minutes later, the UFO is spotted by yet another police officer working for the town of Dupo. He and Officer Stevens from Millstadt have the following conversation.
I first seen it, I open binoculars, you can see the different colors. Now this appears to be white, very large. It's hard to tell, it's pretty far off in the distance. This object was above me about 500 feet, and it was huge.
Just before sunrise, the triangular craft finally flies out of sight, leaving police officers across several townships to try and make sense of the case.
Here you had something over the state of Illinois for around 9 hours. One or multiple objects came in to the north of Chicago from Lake Michigan and then zigzagged slowly over the state, seen in multiple locations by numerous witnesses, including police officers, and then was last seen somewhere in the vicinity of St. Louis. Clearly, we're dealing with something unexplained, and some would say something otherworldly.
Police officers are some of the most reliable witnesses in the world. And then throw in the fact that you've got a 9-hour period where their voices were being recorded over dispatch.
I've got that object inside. It's huge.
If that's not credible, I don't know what is.
But strangely, when police dispatchers again contact nearby Scott Air Force Base, desperate for answers, the military again claims to have no idea what's going on. This despite the fact that according to police, the triangle's flight path was directly through the area of military traffic control.
Scott Air Force Base is 2 miles away from this sighting. That's an amazing thing to consider. You have all of these police officers in this animated series of conversations and observations, and they're asking, is this something from Scott Air Force Base? And yet here's Scott Air Force Base, nope, we got nothing. So what's that all about?
It was complete denial. There was no radar. And it's really hard to believe if they just flat out denied the public any answers whatsoever and just covered everything about this event up for reasons that only they can understand.
Does the military response add to the conversation about government conspiracy and cover-up in regards to UFOs? What if the military isn't talking because they already know that these triangular craft do, in fact, come from other worlds, and they don't want the public to know? Incredibly, there is more evidence of these alien craft available elsewhere in Europe's most famous police UFO file. Coming up, for more than an hour, the Belgian Air Force attempts to intercept a triangular object without success.
These UFOs had the capability of outmaneuvering any military craft that was sent after them.
Despite law enforcement reports and eyewitness accounts, neither the U.S. military nor government has ever acknowledged the Illinois UFO incident. But what if these types of sightings have been seen before by hundreds, maybe even thousands of witnesses? November 29th, 1989. On a crisp and clear Wednesday evening in Eupen, Belgium, just 5 miles from the German border, frightened residents call police to report a large triangular-shaped craft in the skies directly over the town. 2 federal policemen immediately respond. What they find is described as absolutely extraordinary.
A couple of Belgian police officers got a very ultra-clear view of a very low, perfect triangle. Maybe a couple of 100 feet altitude at the most. And it just moved like no other aircraft would move. It was very, very deliberate, very slow, and then just moved off and was gone. And that was only the beginning.
And many witnesses were mesmerized by this, and there was chatter about it over the police radios, civilian sightings coming in, which matched up with the police sightings. This is about as good as you can get in terms of evidence.
As the night progresses, 3 sets of police officers and hundreds of eyewitnesses watch the triangular craft move above the countryside. Not unlike what was reported in Illinois.
And it wasn't exclusively Belgium either. Northwestern Germany, which is right over the other side of the border. And in fact, there were quite a few UFO sightings even going into Central Europe and even Russia.
Sightings continue throughout Europe for 4 months. Thousands of people report seeing triangle craft again and again. Craft that appear to defy physics and logical explanation. The Belgian police are at a complete loss. But could the triangles really be extraterrestrial spacecraft, as UFO researchers believe?
We don't know if they were actually military-owned, if they were ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, but they were moving and flying in a way that did not match with our current technology, leading us to believe that these were probably more advanced type of UFOs from another world.
I built these models based on eyewitness testimony. You'll notice here that it has a white light at each corner. This was almost virtually silent, making this low-frequency electrical humming noise like a transformer. That's something that we've heard many times.
A few months later, on March 30th, 1990, things take a dramatic turn when the Belgian Air Force reports that 2 sets of objects were observed and tracked by the Glans Air Force Base, a NATO facility.
Just look at the radar of these UFOs over Belgium. Clearly, they were real. Clearly, they had mass to them, or they wouldn't have appeared on radar.
For more than an hour, the Belgian Air Force attempts to intercept the triangles without success.
These UFOs had the capability of outmaneuvering any military craft that was sent after them. So again, adding credence to the fact that they may be otherworldly craft.
It departed their area at about 1,600 kilometers per hour in less than a second. So we're looking at about a 40G maneuver, something that pilots couldn't withstand.
During these events or sightings, there were 9 attempted interceptions. That is incredible.
For the first time on national television, new evidence reveals General de Broer of the Belgian Air Force explaining why NATO F-16s are no match for the Flying Triangle.
What these pilots detected was well outside the normal flying envelope, varying from speeds between 150 knots till 990 knots. An acceleration which occurred in a few seconds.
Our best technology was absolutely no match for the things that they witnessed.
This is a straight-up acknowledgement from the Belgian military in the aftermath. These objects had maneuvering capabilities that we just don't have. They would have instant acceleration from near hovering, loitering to 1,000 miles per hour type speeds. And then also just altitude drops of nearly, I think, 4,000 feet in 1 or 2 seconds. That's nearly a mile. I mean, incredible changes in altitude that, again, our craft, we have no capability of doing this.
Skeptics claim that the triangles reported by the Belgian Air Force are nothing more than an advanced top-secret experimental aircraft that was misidentified.
Skeptics tried out the explanation. Well, people probably saw stealth technology. Why? Well, because the stealth fighter had just recently been unveiled. But the only unique thing about the stealth aircraft is that they are radar stealthy, so they're not easily detectable on radar. But in terms of performance, stealth aircraft can't do any of the things that were reported during the wave of the so-called Belgian Triangle.
General de Broer's absolutely incredible analysis continues.
Visual observations always describe a machine which hangs and hovers above the surface at quite a low altitude without making any noise. Now, with the current technology, that will be impossible. And of course, these speeds would be impossible to tolerate for a human being.
Might the evidence regarding triangular UFOs in Belgium and Illinois finally be clear and conclusive? And what of the orb UFOs seen in Minnesota and in the Columbia River Basin? If these events are evidence of interstellar intelligence visiting our world, could there be truth to the theory that such visitations have been happening for a very long time? There are those who believe the answer may lie back in the U.S., in the legends of Native Americans. Coming up.
But people have been having encounters for centuries, thousands of years, actually.
Some of these things that our ancestors saw look remarkably similar to what we're seeing today.
Researchers believe the evidence gathered by police about the interstellar origin of triangular aircraft and orb UFOs is hard to deny. But what can we make of their visits to specific locations in America? Places like the Yakima Indian Reservation in Washington State, and even Illinois.
These triangular-shaped craft passed over Illinois, over land that is considered by Native Americans to be sacred. And this suggests that they've been here for a very long time.
According to researchers, the Illinois Territory may have been visited because of a mysterious and sacred connection to its earliest inhabitants.
We have the Native American reports going back hundreds of years, and it all paints a picture of an area where there have been a long history of strange sightings in the same location, but over many, many years.
The upper Mississippi Valley was inhabited long before the arrival of Europeans by the Illini people, who the French called the Illinois. Scholars have long noted that the legends of the Illinois are filled with powerful supernatural entities they called Thunderbirds.
We have a very fragmented record of the Thunderbirds. We see many images of them in art carved onto stones on the top of monuments. The Thunderbirds were deities that lived up in the sky. So when we see a lot of the images of ancient Native American warriors dressed up in bird costumes, they're dressing themselves as those protector spirits, the Thunderbirds.
This goes back centuries, apparently, of sightings and stories about a large winged creature with a wingspan of 40 feet or more that made a sound like thunder, hence Thunderbird. And it was something that they would talk about in their oral history tradition for many, many years and generations.
Although mainstream historians contend that the Thunderbirds legend is based on sightings of real birds that were somehow threatening to the Illinois people, is it possible, as UFO investigators suggest, that Thunderbirds were aerospace machines observed by the people with no understanding of technology, aircraft, nor UFOs?
Were they trying to describe what they saw the best way they can? Because when you look into legends, sometimes they're trying to describe technological devices. Many UFO researchers believe that the depictions by the indigenous people might have been the same exact type of UFO that was seen flying across Illinois.
For the UFO community, questions remain. Are the triangular craft of Illinois related somehow to those seen in the skies of Belgium? And are they connected to the glowing orb UFOs encountered by Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson and witnessed by numerous police over the Columbia River? And if so, how far back in time might such UFOs have appeared on our planet?
So the question is, well, could any of this be more than just myths and legends, but be a retelling of actual events? And it seems that some of these things that apparently our ancestors were seeing and then recording, you think, wait a minute, that looks very similar to some of these modern descriptions of UFOs.
The observations, testimony, and reports by police play a decisive role in better understanding the UFO phenomenon. For researchers, the evidence of extraterrestrial visitation is overwhelming. So too is the recognition that interstellar entities continue to visit our world, as they did in the distant past.